The stage collapsed, and Asher and the audience subconsciously rushed to Violet's side. I was pinned under the ruins, watching him panic and lose his composure as he performed CPR on Violet. Violet asked him weakly, "Asher, do you still like me?" Asher didn't say a word, but his eyes turned red. He had always been steady, but at this moment, he was so scared that his hands were trembling. I closed my eyes and let the tears flow. Today, I asked Asher if he could come to watch my performance. He said he couldn't get away because he had a surgery today. "Asher, it's over between us." After being pushed out of the operating room, the doctor took a look at my leg and asked, "Do you play the piano or dance?" I said, "The piano." The doctor's nervous expression relaxed. "That's good. It may take some time for your leg to recover." I looked down at my intact hands, and then moved my legs, only to find that my right leg had lost sensation. When the nurse changed my dressing, I accidentally overheard their conversation. "Alas, that dancer in the next room seems to be Asher's girlfriend. You didn't see Asher's expression when he carried Violet here. He's so cold to the opposite sex in our hospital. But he was so anxious when he carried Violet yesterday. Those reporters blocked his way, and he roared at them to get out of the way. Asher has a cold personality and is indifferent to everything. I seldom saw him smile and rarely saw him lose his temper." A nurse applied medicine and gave me an injection gently. She also thoughtfully placed a hot water bag for me. She smiled at me. "The medicine is cold and the infusion is too fast, which can easily cause pain, so it's better to put a hot water bag. If there's swelling or redness, remember to call me." I nodded and smiled back at her. Before leaving, the nurse was still sighing. "This is the first time Asher has taken a leave. He's just to take care of Violet in the hospital." I was left alone in the ward. I took out my mobile phone and dialed Asher's number. It took a long time before Asher answered the phone. Before I could say anything, Asher said, "Serena, I won't go back for lunch at noon. I still have surgeries." This was the first time Asher took the initiative to call me to report his itinerary. But he was lying to me. In the past, I would keep pestering Asher, sending him countless messages and nagging in his ear non-stop. A nurse said Asher had taken a leave. We had been married for 3 years, and he hardly had any days off throughout the year. Unlike others were forced to work overtime, while he was willing to. Every new year, he would voluntarily cancel his annual leave and change it to Christmas. His colleagues in the hospital were very happy to change shifts with him. We didn't even have a wedding, let alone a honeymoon. The rumors about Violet and Asher on the internet were everywhere. After seeing Violet's face clearly on the internet, I suddenly understood why Asher rushed towards Violet without hesitation. I stayed in the hospital for half a month. During these half a month, Asher called me every day. At a fixed time every day. His voice was cold. "I'm working overtime today, and won't go back." I replied to him every day, "Okay. I got it." I heard from the nurse that Asher had taken a month's leave and he had been staying by Violet's bedside in the ward without leaving for half a month. When the nurse changed the dressing, I often heard them chatting. My leg was injured, so I could only lie in bed. Except for the occasional help from the nursing workers for washing up, I was almost always in bed. So I was quite interested in the gossip among the nurses. If the protagonists of the story weren't my husband on the marriage certificate, I would probably be more interested. Buying a cup of milk tea and having popcorn to listen to it as gossip. That would be really interesting. But in this couple's reunion after a long separation, Asher is my husband and I've become the evil female character who breaks them up. I can't be happy. Violet posted a selfie photo of herself in a hospital gown on social media. The photo inadvertently showed a man's tall and slender back and his long, slender fingers with distinct joints. He was wearing a Rolex Submariner watch on his wrist. The watch strap was a bit old. The caption read, "Well, don't worry. He's taking good care of me." The fans and netizens who smelled the gossip immediately flocked to the comment section. "Violet, is he your boyfriend? A blessing for hand lovers. These hands are so beautiful and suitable for holding mine." Violet immediately posted another Weibo to reply to this netizen and declare her sovereignty over Asher, already holding hands. The photo was still of her in a hospital gown. looking like it was taken on the spot. Her and Asher's hands were intertwined. So it was so easy for them to hold hands. I remember when I was with Asher in college. It was like an undercover meeting at the underground party. He never allowed me to have affectionate behaviors with him in public. Until graduation. My roommate Luna didn't even find out that we had been together long ago. After graduation. When I told my roommate that I had married Asher. My roommate looked at me in horror. Are you crazy from unrequited love? If it weren't for the fact that the marriage certificate was an established fact, my roommate would probably think that I was just one of Asher's fanglers. During my hospitalization, Luna came to see me. She asked me cautiously, "Have you divorced Asher?" I was stunned for a moment and said calmly, "Soon." Luna didn't ask more. Before leaving, she patted her chest and smiled brightly at me. "You're welcome to come to me anytime." I also looked at her happily. At night when I was about to fall asleep, Asher called me again. His voice was still neither cold nor hot, and no other emotions could be heard. "The hospital is very busy recently. I won't go home for this half a month." I still replied, "Got it." He didn't know that through the transparent glass, I saw his figure standing in the corridor. After that phone call last night, Asher never called me again. Probably he thought it was troublesome to call me every day to report, so he simply made it clear all at once. Occasionally, Luna would come to the hospital and push me to take a stroll in the guard and downstairs. We ran into Asher. But he didn't see me. The tall and straight man bent over to push the woman in a hospital gown in the wheelchair. The woman had fair skin, red lips and white teeth, and looked gentle. Violet pestered to eat ice cream. Asher squatted in front of her wheelchair. "It's too cold. You can't eat it." Violet pulled his hand and acted cautiously. And Asher still bought an ice cream for her. The corner of her mouth got smeared with ice cream. Asher reached out to wipe it for her directly, but then put his hand back into his pocket. I saw the calm and restrained love in his eyes. Violet smiled brightly. "Asher, help me wipe my mouth." Across the crowd, Violet's smile fell on me, and Asher had his back to me. At this moment, I realized that there was a vast distance like mountains, rivers, and colorful lakes between Asher and me. Asher wouldn't refuse to buy me an ice cream in winter. But he didn't care whether I would catch a cold or not. He wouldn't bend down to wipe the ice cream from the corner of my mouth either. He would say, "Serena, wipe it yourself. It's unhygienic." The attending doctor re-examined me and told me the precautions. "You can be discharged from the hospital next week." I nodded to show that I understood. Luna needed to go on a business trip next week, so I would need to hire someone to help me. Before leaving, the doctor said again, "Remember to go out in the wheelchair and take a stroll more often." I struggled to turn the wheelchair by myself and took a stroll downstairs. When I returned to the ward for lunch, I found that a photo had become a hot topic on Weibo. The photo showed Asher's back and Violet's front face. From the age of 16 to 26, Asher was holding Violet, leaving a broad figure, and Violet's face was facing the camera. Looking closely, the photo at the age of 26 was taken in the hospital. Behind it, there was also a blurry image of me struggling to push the wheelchair by myself. The cold-hearted surgeon vs. the beautiful dancer, the reunion of long-separated lovers, like a forbidden step-sibling relationship coming true. When I saw these titles, my heart skipped a beat. There were even more exciting captions. "The breakup of the forbidden step-sibling relationship is the most exciting. So what if they break up? They still have to have New Year's Eve dinner at the same table during the spring festival." When I saw these words, it was like a sudden enlightenment in my mind. The old photo that Asher had always kept in his wallet was of his stepsister brought by his stepmother. After being married to him for 3 years, I knew he had a sister but had never seen her. Every time I proposed to meet her, he refused. All those mysteries became clear in an instant. I had secretly liked Asher, and he should have noticed it long ago. Once when he was drunk, I quietly followed him. I summoned up the courage to approach him, but he turned around. I quickly turned my head and had my back to him, my heart beating very fast. Then I heard the man's low and cold voice from behind, "Serena, aren't you supposed to bring water? Hand it over." Since that day, we had interactions. He had already noticed my feelings for him. He took the initiative to confess his love to me. Be with me, hading fulfilled my obsession. And marry me. All these processes took less than half a year and went surprisingly smoothly. The happiness that I originally thought I was immersed in was actually a cage that Asher had created for me with his own hands. He married me because he liked Violet. His ridiculous sense of morality told him that he couldn't go any further with Violet. They were forcibly separated by their parents. Violet went abroad, and he stayed in China to continue his postgraduate studies. He needed someone who could quickly make him forget Violet and make his parents feel at ease. And I was the one who willingly fell into the trap. All these were what I guessed from Violet's Weibo. It was the end of the year. I searched all over the internet but couldn't find anyone willing to take my order. Most people thought it was unlucky to go to the hospital at the end of the year and didn't want to take the job. Even when I tripled the price. No one inquired. So I had to stay in the hospital for a few more days until Luna came back. The hospital wards were in short supply. A new patient, an old man, moved into the ward next to mine. The old man walked nimbly. And his movements were even more agile than mine. The old man smiled and asked me, "Are you alone, girl?" I nodded, yes. I had delayed checking out of the hospital. And now the wards were in short supply. The attending doctor and the nurse had urged me several times. I looked embarrassed and was full of apologies. "I'll leave soon. My friend will be here soon." The nurse was about my age. Seeing that I had been alone these days, she sighed deeply. "Okay. It's okay. Stay for one more day at most." I'll ask the attending doctor to be more lenient. Probably seeing the panic and helplessness on my face. She smiled and winked at me, mouthing to me, "Don't worry. Stay here. Don't be afraid." The next day, Luna was stuck at the airport and didn't arrive in time. Meanwhile, new patients were sent to the hospital. I heard a familiar male voice growling in a low voice at the door. "What are you lingering in the hospital for? Do you think the hospital is your home?" I felt extremely embarrassed. I hurriedly packed my things, sat in a wheelchair and moved the bags and parcels to the door. The grandma and the same ward couldn't bear to watch and helped me carry them together. Opening the door, a gloomy face came into view. The man had a high bridge nose, and his eyebrows were tightly knitted. He looked terribly impatient. He questioned me in a low voice. "Do you know how scarce the hospital beds are now? You've been staying here for a week and still won't leave. Do you think the hospital is your home?" When I saw his face, I was stunned for a moment. It was Asher. And he was still holding a suitcase in his right hand. He was dressed in casual clothes. And Violet was standing beside him, holding his arm. I was wearing a mask, and my face became even more embarrassed. I lowered my head and said softly, "I got it." I clumsily moved my things outside. My belongings were scattered all over the corridor. Until the warm-hearted little nurse called my name. "Serena. Let me help you. I'm off work now." Asher suddenly grabbed my wheelchair and took a long stride, standing in front of me. We looked at each other. And then Asher recognized me. He was stunned for a moment. I pursed my lips and smiled. The little nurse was very warm-hearted and kept asking me, "Sister Serena, where's your husband? Isn't it written on your file that you're married?" I looked up at Asher. After 3 years of marriage, Asher's colleagues didn't even know if he had a wife. I smiled and said, "I'm not married." It was a mistake in filling out the information. Asher wanted to step forward but was pulled back by Violet's hand. I pushed the wheelchair into the elevator. When entering the elevator, I saw a flash of panic in his eyes. At the moment when the elevator door was closing, he immediately rushed forward and shouted my name, "Serena. Wait for me." I directly pressed the button for the first floor. He hurriedly stretched his hand in to stop the elevator and accidentally got his hand pinched by the door. Asher withdrew his hand in pain. And before the elevator door closed completely, his eyes were full of confusion and disbelief. After getting into the car, he sent me a message. Among the green chat bubbles on the screen, it was all me chattering and sharing things before. And my sharing stopped a month ago. In the past, he thought I talked too much. When he was cooking, I would lean close to him and say, "Let me tell you, something happened in our unit yesterday." Before I could finish my words, He would turn his head to look at me and say, "Serena, be quiet." I would say, "Oh, okay. From now on, I won't bother him anymore. I've clearly understood my position in his heart." Asher took the initiative to send a message, "Wait for me. Don't go anywhere." I didn't reply to him. When I got home, I tried to walk slowly by supporting myself on things. I also started to have some feeling in my legs. The doctor said that I would basically say goodbye to all kinds of sports in the future, and it would be good enough if I could recover to the point of walking and jogging a little. During the month in the hospital, I had already accepted that I couldn't jump around, climb mountains, or do strenuous sports with my legs. Also, having Sashern. Asher had never loved me. I was almost asleep when I was woken up. When Asher got home, there were tiny white dots on his shoulders. It was the first snowfall of this year outside. I was lying on the bed, and he was carrying a bag in his hand. His face was a bit flushed, and he was panting slightly. He probably ran all the way up. He looked at me, his thin lips slightly opening and closing, as if he wanted to say something but then closed his mouth again. After a while, he said, "Why didn't you tell me that you were in the hospital? When did it happen?" Suddenly, the light in the room was turned on. My eyes couldn't adapt to it for a moment, and I squinted to look at him. "A month ago." He paused for a moment, as if thinking about how long ago a month was. His eyes fell on me, and his pupils suddenly shrank with a questioning tone in his voice. "A month ago? Was it during your performance?" I nodded and yawned, feeling extremely sleepy. "Turn off the light. I want to sleep." Asher suddenly asked, "Why didn't you leave the light on for me today?" Hearing his words, I couldn't help sneering. Yeah. Why should I leave the light on for him? In the past 3 years, when he worked overtime, I would leave food for him and keep a light on for him. It was all just me being touched by my own efforts. After 3 years, I couldn't even melt a block of ice. I didn't want to try anymore. "I'm sleepy. Turn it off." The atmosphere froze. After a while, he turned off the light. In the early morning, surprisingly, Asher didn't go for a morning run. I was a bit dazed when I saw him sitting at the dining table downstairs. I was holding on to the stairs, and he quickly walked to my side, crouched down, and easily picked me up in his arms. His tall figure was a head taller than mine. In the past, I liked to cling to him the most and let him hold my hand, with our fingers intertwined, and walk on the street. He took the initiative to hold my hand and picked me up without saying a word, but I felt embarrassed. I quickly grabbed his wrist. "Well, I can walk by myself." "Thank you." He put me down and helped me walk to the dining table. He sat opposite me and ate his toast slowly. I lowered my head to drink milk, and the inexplicable gaze from above made me feel uncomfortable. I pretended to smile naturally and looked at him. "Aren't you going to work? Hurry up. You'll be late." Compared to me, he was much more natural. He took a sip of coffee gently. "I got your medical report from your attending doctor. I'll take you for a re-examination later." "Take me for a re-examination? What about Violet?" I quickly refused. "No need. I can go next week." His voice turned cold. "Next week? I have a full schedule of surgeries next week." I shook my head. "It's okay. I can go by myself next week." His expression suddenly became a bit colder, and I changed my mind. "All right. And you can give me a ride when you're free." After having breakfast, we were about to get in the car. Asher received a phone call. He frowned tightly and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Don't worry. I'll come right away." He looked down at me sitting in the wheelchair, with a bit of anxiety in his eyes. "Serena, I have something urgent to deal with temporarily. I'll take you home first." He pushed my wheelchair, and I put my hand on his. "Go ahead and deal with your business." I pushed the wheelchair and turned around to go home by myself. He stood behind me, and his voice echoed in the parking lot, but I didn't hear clearly what he said. The car roared and rushed out of the parking lot, leaving behind exhaust fumes. The only person who could disrupt him like this was Violet. On the day when the stage collapsed, for the first time, I saw such complicated emotions in his eyes. There was fear, anxiety, panic, And also carefully restrained love. The mouth can lie, but the reddened eyes can't. In front of me, he had always been steady, as if nothing could disrupt his rhythm. I asked my leader for a month's leave. Sitting in a wheelchair, I went to a law firm for consultation. The relationship between Asher and me was quite simple. In essence, he used me to escape his feelings for his stepmother's daughter and made me a shield to reassure his family. Fortunately, we didn't have any children. For the first time, I was so glad that Asher had been unwilling to have children after marriage. After contacting the lawyer, Luna came to pick me up and took me to look at various houses. After looking at the houses, she sent me home. Looking at the layout of the house, I felt a bit dazed. After I learned about the relationship between Asher and Violet, any behavior of Asher in my eyes was related to Violet. When Asher got home, I had already finished dinner, and there were still tiny white snowflakes on his shoulders. He was carrying a box of desserts from Zoo's dessert shop in his hand. This kind of dessert was very hard to buy as it was limited in quantity every day. Before he got home, I had already known what he had done today from Violet's VIBO. Violet fell down at home in the morning. As soon as he received the call, he rushed to find her. And he accompanied Violet to do rehabilitation in the park. He also went across districts to buy desserts from Zoo's dessert shop for her. Asher put the desserts in front of me, and his tone became gentle. I remember you don't like desserts with too much cream and do like taro paste instead. I nodded, thank you. I don't like taro paste. I like desserts with a lot of cream. When I was with Asher, he would give me gifts on every festival, buy me small cakes, and make brown sugar water for me. Thinking of these things, I would think that he had feelings for me. But this last bit of fantasy was shattered. In Violet's Weibo post today, the caption read, "My favorite cream cake and my favorite person." Clearly, I liked cream, but Asher bought me taro paste. I liked milk tea with full sugar and ice, but he would change it to a hot drink with half sugar for me. On our first date, when I told him that I wanted a cream cake and iced milk tea, Asher was stunned for a moment. Because what I liked was also what Violet liked. Mentioning these would remind him of Violet, so he changed the cream cake to a taro paste cake. Even the way of making brown sugar water for a girl with stomachicae was taught by Violet. Asher took off his coat, ran to the kitchen, turned on the stove, and quickly made a cup of ginger brown sugar tea. I looked at him in confusion. Was he going to go out to deliver brown sugar water to Violet so late? He was really affectionate. A takeout delivery could have arrived in a flash. Not long ago, Violet's VIBO was updated with a very suggestive and ambiguous sentence. The regular stomachicae every month has come again. Suddenly, those beautiful hands with well-defined joints appeared in front of me, and he gently put down the cup. I looked up at him. Asher slightly raised his eyebrows. Forgot. It's your period today. I looked into his dark eyes. Asher. My period has been quite regular and it's always at the end of the month. His expression froze for a moment, and there was a hint of shock in his eyes. He was stunned for a while before coming to his senses. I had been with him for 3 years. A full 3 years. Only today did I realize why he would make brown sugar water for me in the middle of every month. He only remembered Violet's. Asher's thin lips opened and then closed again. After a long while, he said, I remembered it wrong. He took the initiative to bring the cake to my mouth. And I said, Asher. Actually, I also like cakes with a lot of cream. He stood there in a daze, his expression a bit absent-eyed, and immediately put on his coat. Serena. I'll go out and buy one. Wait for me at home. It was snowing outside, and many shops were closed. He didn't get home until 3 hours later. I was drinking water when suddenly a pair of strong arms hugged me from behind. His voice was hoarse. Serena. I bought the flavor you like. Hurry up and eat. He looked at me expectantly with bright eyes. But Asher. I don't want to eat it anymore. He awkwardly looked down at my legs and hurriedly tried to find a topic. You haven't told me yet. How did you hurt your legs? I broke free from his embrace, turned sideways, curved my eyes, and smiled at him faintly. Asher. On the day when I invited you to watch my performance. The stage collapsed and I was pinned under the billboard and got injured. He suddenly raised his eyes and met my smiling eyes. Compared to his panic, I seemed much calmer. In an instant, his face turned pale. That invitation was still lying on the coffee table. That day, Asher took a look at the invitation between his 2 fingers. He opened his mouth, just about to say something. But then he noticed the date on it, chuckled softly, and immediately changed his words. I won't be free that day. The hospital shift schedule is full. I went to the piano performance disappointed. While waiting backstage to go on stage, I saw that familiar face in the audience, and suddenly my heart seemed to be soaked in a honey pot and I felt secretly delighted. He had secretly come to watch my performance. Just as I was about to send him a message to ask him, the stage happened to collapse. The moment the stage billboard fell down, my mind went blank. Asher ran towards the stage. And I thought he was running towards me. Within just a few seconds, the people on the stage were pinned under the billboard. There was chaos below. In the chaos, Asher looked nervous and rushed towards Violet. His eyes immediately turned red. Because he arrived in time, Violet wasn't completely pinned under the billboard. Violet's face was as pale as paper. And Asher's face didn't look any better either. She asked in a low voice, Asher, do you still like me? Then she passed out. Watching Asher's flustered and out of control appearance, I understood. I understood everything. Asher tightly grasped my arm and forcibly pried my fingers apart to interlock his fingers with mine. Serena, Violet is my sister. I raised my eyebrows. She's your sister. I've never met her before. He squeezed my arm with increasing force. And I struggled. Asher, you're hurting me. I walked back to the bedroom on my own. He stood at the end of the bed. His voice trembling. Serena, you can meet her then. Haven't you always wanted to travel? This new year, I'll take you to the Maldives to see the sea. Okay? I covered myself with the quilt and said yes. Actually, there's no need to meet her. We got the marriage certificate. But there was no wedding. No wedding photos. We just had a meal with our parents. At that time, I hadn't met his relatives or his sister. The next morning when I got up, breakfast was already set on the table. Asher sent me a message to remind me, remember to have breakfast. I'll accompany you to take a walk in the park for rehabilitation after work. I consulted a lawyer, made an appointment with a real estate agent to see houses, and paid the deposit. On my way back, I passed through a park, and a big dog barked at me. It had snow-white fur and pitch-black pupils. When I saw this dog, my pupils suddenly contracted. Then I saw the dog's owner. The first time I was bitten by a dog was by the Samoyed. When I lived with Asher, a big dog rushed towards me, barking wildly. It looked at me warily. Asher lowered his eyes and smiled gently. Saner, sit down. The dog reluctantly sat down, its eyes following me. I'm quite afraid of dogs. When Asher wasn't at home, this dog bared its teeth at me, rushed out of the cage, and knocked me down. I was so scared that I stepped on the dog's tail, probably hurting it. It ran around in pain. When Asher came back and saw the scene, there was blood on the ground. The dog was lying on the ground with its tail bleeding. And he immediately looked at me, his eyes full of anger. Serena, did you touch it? His angry look made my mind go blank for a moment. He quickly picked up the Samoyed, stroked its fur, and coaxed it. Don't be afraid. Daddy will take you to the hospital. The blood on the ground was mine. When he came back, the Samoyed drooped its face and hid behind Asher. Asher's face showed a bit of guilt. Sorry, I shouldn't have been angry with you. I forced a smile and shook my head. He bandaged my wound, took me to get vaccinated, and also sent the dog away. Violet walked towards me, leading the Samoyed. Her injury seemed to have recovered quite well. My heart tightened, and I took a step back in fear. She smiled brightly, with a slender figure, and took the initiative to talk to me. We both knew what was going on, but didn't reveal it. Isn't it beautiful? It's the dog that my lover and I raised. Standing by the river, she said, my parents didn't allow me to be with him. He said it didn't matter and would take me away. As long as we love each other, we can overcome all difficulties. My major requires me to study abroad. But he didn't hesitate to buy a house abroad. Wanted to quit his top job. And accompany me to start from scratch abroad. I listened quietly to her words. Asher had torn my heart to pieces bit by bit. I never thought that I could face this day so calmly. I thought I would be heartbroken and willing. But I didn't want to make my parents sad. So I gave up on him. When I cruelly abandoned him and left, he hated me and said that he would never come to see me again in this lifetime. On New Year's Day abroad, he would come to accompany me every year. He said he couldn't do it. Couldn't hate me. Even my own parents thought it was too tiring to take a plane and didn't come to see me. But he was willing to give up all his assets and domestic resources to accompany me to start from scratch abroad. From Violet's words, I also understood why Asher had never spent New Year's Day in the past 3 years but transferred his annual leave to Christmas and flew abroad. He went to accompany Violet, afraid that she would be lonely. After saying that, she raised her thick eyebrows and smiled brightly. What about you? You haven't said anything yet. I smiled gently. You'll be able to be with the person you like soon. Violet has the habit of recording vlogs and posting them on Weibo. So our conversation was all recorded by her. I'm getting divorced. Wish you and Asher happiness. I guessed that she would definitely post it on Weibo. And also bet that Asher would surely hear these words. My leg had almost recovered. I went to the hospital for a re-examination. And the doctor changed my dressing. The nurse who changed my dressing was the young nurse who had helped me during my last hospitalization. After the nurse went out, Asher suddenly pushed the door open. His white coat was the first thing that caught my eye. I looked up and saw his gloomy face. When he saw me, he let out a sigh of relief and hugged me tightly. Why didn't you answer the phone? Only then did I remember that I had turned off my mobile phone. Have you eaten? I'm getting off work. There's a newly opened restaurant nearby with quite good food. Shall we go and eat together? I pushed him away. You're quite busy with work. I don't want to disturb you. He firmly held my hand and took me to the elevator and left without allowing any objections. His movements were quick, as if he was afraid that I would run away. At the restaurant, his eyes kept falling on me. Serena. I've invited Violet to come too. She's my sister. My stepmother's daughter. When Violet arrived, we smiled at each other. She enthusiastically hugged me. Nice to see you again. Serena. Asher's face froze. And Violet's lips were pale. His movements were stiff. And he squeezed my hand even harder. His big hand covered my palm and pinched my fingertips. Serena. This is my sister. Violet. He then said to Violet. Violet. This is my wife. Your sister-in-law. Her name is Serena. Asher peeled shrimps for me. And Violet acted kikikasly. I want some too. Didn't you say that you would only peel shrimps for me? Asher's hand in my drawer paused for a moment. And then he continued to peel them slowly. He looked up at Violet. Violet. Stop making trouble. Asher has a bit of a cleanliness obsession. Except when he's on the operating table. He had never been willing to help me peel shrimps before. This was the first time. Violet and I looked at each other. She was full of provocation, while I looked calm. After dinner, Violet pestered Asher to take her home. Asher looked down at me, put his arm around my waist. Her leg is injured. It's not good for her to be out in the cold wind. I'll call a car for you to go back. Mom and Dad are looking forward to seeing you. I found it funny to see Asher like this. He held my hand as we got into the car. He said, Serena. I booked the plane tickets. We'll go to the Maldives this New Year. Then we'll take makeup wedding photos. We'll hold a wedding when we come back. Seeing that I didn't say anything, he squeezed my palm. Huh? Once we got in the car, it was nice and warm. When he started the engine, I turned to look at him. Asher. It's tiring to act with you. Find someone else. The sound of the car starting up immediately stopped. His hands were resting on the steering wheel. He slowly turned his head. Serena. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath and smiled as I told him. Asher. Using me to make her jealous is a really bad trick. I can see that you two love each other. Don't hold me back anymore. Let's get divorced. Asher was completely flustered. And his heart was pounding like thunder for a moment. His lips were tightly pursed. and his usually cold voice became hoarse. Serena. I don't agree. I said calmly. Asher. Do I really have to make it so clear? I saw your white samoyed. It was following Violet. You were so angry, and thought it was me who hurt the samoyed without even asking what had happened. You've always been reluctant to part with Violet in your heart. I invited you to watch my piano performance, and you refused. That day when I saw you backstage, I thought you had secretly come to watch me. The bouquet of roses beside you. I thought you had prepared them to celebrate for me. I was secretly delighted. But the moment the billboard fell down, you rushed towards Violet. And there's no possibility for us anymore. During my hospitalization, you told me that you were working overtime and wouldn't come home. I heard the nurse say that you took a month's leave to take care of Violet. You've always regarded work as 99% of your life. But you actually took a month's leave for Violet. You don't know that every time you called to lie to me, I could run into you. I saw you pushing her to sunbathe in the hospital garden. Asher's face turned completely pale. He was at a loss and wanted to explain. As he spoke, the corners of his eyes became moist. She invited me to her first performance after returning to China before you did. I was afraid of refusing you and making you overthink. So I lied. About the hospitalization thing. It was my fault. I didn't know that you were also in trouble. If I could do it all over again, I wouldn't have gone to watch her performance from the very beginning. At our last meeting, I made it clear to her that except in front of our parents, we shouldn't meet privately anymore. Since my parents divorced when I was young, my father didn't care about me after he remarried. Due to family reasons. I grew up with her and never felt family affection. My feelings for her had always been ambiguous. It wasn't until I married you that I realized that what I felt for you was love and affection. I listened quietly until he finished speaking. Asher. I got it. After I got out of the car, a force wrapped around me. He lowered his head and buried it in my shoulder. Crying. Serena. I made it clear to her the last time we met. Please don't leave me. Okay? He held me in his arms. But I could no longer feel the burning passion in my heart that came from being attracted to someone. I pushed him away. Asher. Stop it. I gave you 3 years. It's too late now. When I got home, I had already packed my luggage. Seeing the empty room, Asher froze for a moment. He smiled. But then tears fell from his eyes. Serena. Had you already decided to leave me long ago? He took out a piece of paper from his pocket. On it were the plane tickets and hotel reservations that had been booked a long time ago, as well as the studio for taking wedding photos. And the wedding in March of next year. The date at the end was the day when I invited him to watch my performance. He took it out in a hurry. And even his legs were trembling slightly. It's too late, Asher. Our journey together has come to an end. I moved out neatly. I gradually resumed work and started performing in small shows. Asher was unwilling to sign the divorce agreement. We were in a stalemate like this. Next year, I planned to move abroad. For every performance, Asher was never absent. He stood in the audience. And for the first time, I could read his love for me in his eyes. But I remained unmoved. In the last performance in China in the 2nd year, I was almost hit by a billboard again. And the person playing the piano on the stage was my junior fellow apprentice. Asher was also under the billboard, looking at me with a bouquet of roses in his hands. At the moment when the billboard was about to fall, I shouted my junior fellow apprentice's name and ran towards him. Just a little bit more, and the billboard would have fallen down. Slowly opening my eyes, I saw Asher propping up the billboard with his bare hands. His face was flushed, and the veins on his arms were bulging. A layer of cold sweat appeared on his forehead. The excruciating pain made him gasp. He growled in a low voice, Serena. Run. I grabbed my junior fellow apprentice and quickly ran out. With a loud crash, the billboard fell down. Asher was sent to the hospital. His hand was fractured, and he could no longer lift heavy objects with his right hand. He couldn't even perform a single action for a long time. Those hands, which I had always been proud of, could no longer save people. Violet found me and had a big quarrel with me. Serena. If it weren't for you, his hand wouldn't have been injured. At that time, I was teaching students to play the piano. I paused for a moment and looked at her. I'll go and thank him. After that, I took some tonics to visit him. I stood at the door. When he saw me, he immediately sat up. We looked at each other for a long time. For the first time in a year. We looked at each other for such a long time again. Only, at infusible obsession. There was no more affection in my eyes. And his expectant eyes lit up when he looked at me. Asher. Thank you for saving me. When shall we go to get the divorce certificate? He was stunned. After a very long time. His eyes turned red bit by bit. His voice was hoarse. Serena. At the moment when I saw you running towards someone else, I couldn't help feeling so sad in my heart. The pain was so intense that I felt like I couldn't breathe. Compared to the physical pain, I was more afraid that the billboard would hit you. I knew that later. Some experts predicted that it would take 10 adult men to hold up this billboard, but Asher held it up by himself. His adrenaline burst out in an instant. But I understand now how much it hurt you when I ran towards Violet before. Originally, I still had a glimmer of hope. But after seeing the video of you meeting Violet, and you saying that you wished me and her happiness. When I heard you say such words of wishing me happiness with someone else, I felt like I was suffocating and dying. There were tears in the corners of his eyes. All his wounds were aching and his heart hurt even more. He lowered his eyes and stretched out his hand to me. Give it to me. I'll sign it. Serena. I'm sorry. Before I left, he called out to me. His voice was reluctant and the ending trembled. Serena. Don't listen to what others say. I got my hand injured voluntarily. Don't feel guilty. It's all my fault that I'm sorry to you. If it were anyone else under the billboard, I would have tried my best to save them. But since it was you, I would go all out. Asher. Our journey together has come to an end. Outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, Luna was carrying a dozen beers in her hand and waving at me happily. The sky was blue and the light was dazzling. Sitting on the lawn in the park, the clear clinking sound of the cans celebrated the beginning of my new life.